Welcome back to another episode, if you will, of exploring Atlas Shrugged. I'm going to be reading from chapter 6 of part 2 of the book. Chapter 6 is referred to as Miracle Metal. The part that I'm going to be reading to you, I'm going to kind of be taking off in the middle of a discussion that is taking place by a group of the antagonists here, led by Jim Taggart and Dr. Ferris, who we've met previously, and Wesley Mouch and Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson is the leader of the fictionalized United States here, and I want us to pay very close attention to what's being said. And just kind of, there again, think about the conditions that the United States finds itself in today, and then really focus on how the verbiage that Ms. Rand uses here, strangely enough, is being used today. And there again, remembering that what Ms. Rand is addressing is pretty much economic Marxism, and what we're dealing with today is social Marxism. They're the same beast, just coming from different branches of a genetic line, if you will. So I'm going to start off here. Once again, this is chapter 6 of part 2, and let's see where this goes. And James Taggart glanced at the window. There were patches of blue in the sky above the spacious streets of Washington, the faint blue of mid-April, and a few beams breaking through the clouds. A monument stood shining in the distance, hit by a ray of sun. It was a tall white obelisk, erected to the memory of the man Dr. Ferris was quoting, the man in whose honor the city had been named. James Taggart looked away. "I don't like the professor's remarks," said Lawson loudly and sullenly. "Keep still," said Wesley Mouch. "Dr. Ferris is not talking theory, but practice." "Well, if you want to talk practice," said Fred Kinnan, "then let me tell you that we can't worry about businessmen at a time like this. What we've got to think about is jobs. More jobs for the people. In my unions, every man who's working is feeding 5 who aren't, not counting his own pack of starving relatives. If you want my advice, I know you won't go for it, but it's just a thought issue, a directive, making it compulsory to add, say, 1/3 more men to every payroll in the country." "Good God," yelled Taggart, "are you crazy? We can barely meet our payrolls as it is. There's not enough work for the men we've got now. 1/3 more? We wouldn't have any use for them, whatever." "Who cares whether you'd have any use for them?" said Fred Kinnan. "They need jobs. That's what comes first, need, doesn't it? Not your profits." "It's not a question of profits," yelled Taggart hastily. "I haven't said anything about profits. I haven't given you any grounds to insult me. It's just a question of where in hell we'd get the money to pay your men when half of our trains are running empty and there's not enough freight to fill a trolley car." His voice slowed down suddenly to a tone of cautious thoughtfulness. "However, we do understand the plight of the working men, and it's just a thought. We could, perhaps, take on a certain extra number if we were permitted to double our freight rates, which—" "Have you lost your mind?" yelled Orrin Boyle. "I'm going broke on the rate you're charging now. I shudder every time a damn boxcar pulls in or out of the mills. They're bleeding me to death. I can't afford it, and you want to double it?" "It's not essential whether you can afford it or not," said Taggart coldly. "You have to be prepared to make some sacrifices. The public needs railroads. Need Connie's first above your profits." "What profits?" yelled Orrin Boyle. "When did I ever make any profits? Nobody can accuse me of running a profit-making business. Just look at my balance sheet, and then look at the books of a certain competitor of mine who's got all the customers," he's referring to Reardon, "who's got all the customers, all the raw materials, all the technical advantages, and a monopoly on secret formulas, and tell me who's the profiteer. But of course the public does need railroads, and perhaps I could manage to absorb a certain raise in rates if I were to get— it's just a thought— if I were to get a subsidy to carry me over the next year or two until I catch my stride. And what? Again? yelled Mr. Weatherby, losing his primness. "How many loans have you got from us, and how many extensions, suspensions, and moratoriums? You haven't repaid a penny, and with all of you boys going broke and the tax receipts crashing, where do you expect us to get the money to hand you a subsidy?" "There are people who aren't broke," said Boyle slowly. "You boys have no excuse for permitting all that need and misery to spread throughout the country so long as there are people who aren't broke." "I can't help it," yelled Wesley Mouch. "I can't do anything about it. I need wider powers." They could not tell what had prompted Mr. Thompson to attend this particular conference. He had said little, but had listened with interest. It seemed as if there were something which he had wanted to learn, and now he looked as if he had learned it. He stood up and smiled cheerfully. "Go ahead, Wesley," he said. "Go ahead with number 10289. You won't have any trouble at all." They had all risen to their feet in gloomily reluctant deference. Wesley Mouch glanced down at his sheet of paper, then said in a petulant tone of voice, "If you want me to go ahead, you'll have to declare a state of total emergency." "I'll declare it any time you're ready. There are certain difficulties which I'll leave it up to you. Work it out any way you wish. It's your job. Let me see the rough draft tomorrow or next day, but don't bother me about the details. I've got a speech to make on the radio in a half an hour. The chief difficulty is that I'm not sure whether the law actually grants us the power to put into effect certain provisions of Directive Number 10289. I fear they might be open to challenge." "Oh, hell, we've passed so many emergency laws that if you hunt through them, you're sure to dig up something that will cover it." Mr. Thompson turned to the others with a smile of good fellowship. "I'll leave you boys to iron out the wrinkles," he said. "I appreciate your coming to Washington to help us." "Glad to have seen you." They waited until the door closed after him, then resumed their seats. They did not look at one another. They had not heard the text of Directive Number 10289, but they knew what it would contain. They had known it for a long time, in that special manner which consisted of keeping secrets from oneself and leaving knowledge untranslated into words. And, by the same method, they now wished it were possible for them to not hear the words of the directive. It was to avoid moments such as this that all the complex twistings of their minds had been devised. They wished the directives to go into effect. They wished it could be put into effect without words, so that they would not have to know that what they were doing was what it was. Nobody had ever announced that Directive Number 10289 was the final goal of his effort. Yet, for generations past, men had worked to make it possible, and for months past, every provision of it had been prepared for by countless speeches, articles, sermons, editorials, by purposeful voices that screamed with anger if anyone named their purpose. "The picture now is this," said Wesley Mouch. "The economic condition of the country was better the year before it last than it was last year, and last year it was better than it is at present. It's obvious that we would not be able to survive another year of the same progression. Therefore, our sole objective must now be to hold the line, to stand still in order to catch our stride, to achieve total stability. Freedom has been given a chance and has failed. Therefore, more stringent controls are necessary. Since men are unable and unwilling to solve their problems voluntarily, they must be forced to do it." He paused, picked up the sheet of paper, then added in a less formal tone of voice, "Hell, what it comes down to is that we can manage to exist as and where we are, but we can't afford to move. So we've got to stand still. We've got to stand still. We've got to make these bastards stand still." His head drawn into his shoulders, he was looking at them with the anger of a man declaring that the country's troubles were a personal affront to him. So many men seeking favors had been afraid of him that he now acted as if his anger were a solution to everything, and if his anger were omnipotent, as if all he had to do was to get angry. Yet, facing him, the men who sat in silent semicircle before his desk were uncertain whether the presence of fear in the room was their own emotion, or whether the hunched figure behind the desk generated the panic of a cornered rat. Wesley Mouch had a long, square face and a flat-topped skull, made more so by a brush haircut. His lower lip was a petulant bulb, and the pale, brownish pupils of his eyes looked like the yolks of eggs smeared under the not fully translucent whites. His facial muscles moved abruptly, and the movement vanished, having conveyed no expression. No one had ever seen him smile. Wesley Mouch came from a family that had known neither poverty nor wealth, nor distinction for many generations. It had clung, however, to a tradition of its own, that of being college-bred, and therefore of despising men who were in business. The family's diplomas had always hung on the wall in the manner of a reproach to the world, because the diplomas had not automatically produced the material equivalents of their attested spiritual value. Among the family's numerous relatives there was one rich uncle. He had married his money, and in his widowed old age he had picked Wesley as his favorite from among his many nephews and nieces, because Wesley was the least distinguished of the lot, and therefore, thought Uncle Julius, the safest. Uncle Julius did not care for people who were brilliant. He did not care for the trouble of managing his money either. So he turned the job over to Wesley. By the time Wesley graduated from college, there was no money left to manage. Uncle Julius blamed it on Wesley's cunning and cried that Wesley was an unscrupulous schemer. But there had been no scheme about it. Wesley could not have said just where the money had gone. In high school, Wesley Mouch had been one of the worst students, who had passionately envied those who were the best. College taught him that he did not have to envy them at all. After graduation, he took a job in the advertising department of a company that manufactured a bogus corn cure. The cure sold well, and he rose to be the head of his department. He left it to take charge of the advertising of a hair restorer, then of a patented brassiere, then of a new soap, then of a soft drink, and then he became the advertising vice president of an automobile concern. He tried to sell automobiles as if they were a bogus corn cure. They did not sell. He blamed it on the insufficiency of his advertising budget. It was the president of the automobile concern who recommended him to Reardon. It was Reardon who introduced him to Washington. Reardon, who knew no standard by which to judge the activities of his Washington man. It was James Taggart who gave him a start in the Bureau of Economic Planning and National Resources in exchange for double-crossing Reardon in order to help Orrin Boyle in exchange for destroying Dan Conway. From then on, people helped Wesley Mouch to advance, for the same reason as that which had prompted Uncle Julius. They were people who believed that mediocrity was safe. The men who now sat in front of his desk had been taught that the law of causality was a superstition, and that one had to deal with the situation of the moment without considering its cause. By the situation of the moment, they had concluded that Wesley Mouch was a man of superlative skill and cunning, since millions inspired to power, but he was the one who had achieved it. It was not within their method of thinking to know that Wesley Mouch was the zero at the meeting point of forces unleashed in destruction against one another. "This is just a rough draft of Directive Number 10-289, said Wesley Mouch, "which Jean, Clem, and I have dashed off just to give you the general idea. We want to hear your opinions, suggestions, and so forth, you being the representatives of labor, industry, transportation, and the professions." Fred Kinnan got off the windowsill and sat down on the arm of a chair. Orrin Boyle spit out the butt of his cigar. James Taggart looked down at his own hands. Dr. Ferris was the only one who seemed to be at ease. "In the name of the general welfare," read Wesley Mouch, "to protect the people's security, to achieve full equality and total stability, it is decreed for the duration of the national emergency that, point 1, all workers, wage earners, and employees of any kind whatsoever shall henceforth be attached to their jobs and shall not leave, nor be dismissed, nor change employment under penalty of a term in jail. The penalty shall be determined by the Unification Board, such board to be appointed by the Bureau of Economic Planning and National Resources. All persons reaching the age of 21 shall report to the Unification Board, which shall assign them to where, in its opinion, their services will best serve the interests of the nation. Point 2, all industrial, commercial, manufacturing, and business establishments of any nature whatsoever shall henceforth remain in operation, and the owners of such establishments shall not quit, nor leave, nor retire, nor close, sell, or transfer their businesses under penalty of the nationalization of their establishment of any and all of their property. Point 3, all patents and copyrights pertaining to any devices, inventions, formulas, processes, and works of any nature whatsoever shall be turned over to the nation as a patriotic emergency gift by means of gift certificates to be signed voluntarily by the owners of all such patents and copyrights." The Unification Board shall then license the use of such patents and copyrights to all applicants equally and without discrimination for the purpose of eliminating monopolistic practices, discarding obsolete products, and making the best available to the whole nation. No trademarks, brand names, or copyrighted titles shall be used. Every formerly patented product shall be known by a new name and sold by all manufacturers under the same name, which name to be selected by the Unification Board. All private trademarks and brand names are hereby abolished. Point 4. No new devices, inventions, products, or goods of any nature whatsoever not now in the market shall be produced, invented, manufactured, or sold after the date of this directive. The Office of Patents and Copyrights is hereby suspended. Point 5. Every establishment, concern, corporation, or person engaged in production of any nature whatsoever shall henceforth produce the same amount of goods per year as they or he produced during the basic year. No more and no less. The year to be known as a basic or yardstick year is to be the year ending on the date of this directive, or underproduction shall be fined. Over or underproduction shall be fined, such fines to be determined by the Unification Board. Point 6. Every person of any age, sex, class, or income shall henceforth spend the same amount of money on the purchase of goods per year as he or she spent during the basic year. No more and no less. Over or under purchasing shall be fined, such fines to be determined by the Unification Board. Point 7. All wages, prices, salaries, dividends, profits, interest rates, and forms of income of any nature whatsoever shall be frozen at their present figures as of the date of this directive. Point 8. All cases arising from and rules not specifically provided for in this directive shall be settled and determined by the Unification Board, whose decisions will be final. There was, even within the 4 men who had listened, a remnant of human dignity which made them sit still and feel sick for the length of 1 minute. James Taggart spoke first, his voice low, but had the trembling intensity of an involuntary scream. Well, why not? Why should they have it if we don't? Why should they stand above us if we are to perish? Let's make sure that we all perish together. Let's make sure that we leave them no chance to survive. That's a damn funny thing to say about a very practical plan that will benefit everybody, said Orrin Boyle shrilly, looking at Taggart in frightened astonishment. Dr. Ferris chuckled. Taggart's eyes seemed to focus, and he said, his voice louder, "Yes, of course, it's a very practical plan. It's necessary, practical, and just. It will solve everybody's problems. It will give everybody a chance to feel safe, a chance to rest." "It will give security to the people," said Eugene Lawson, his mouth slithering into a smile. Security, that's what the people want. If they want it, why shouldn't they have it? Just because a handful of rich will object? It's not the rich who object, said Dr. Ferris lazily. The rich drool for security more than any other sort of animal. Haven't you discovered that yet? Well, who'll object? Snapped Lawson. Dr. Ferris smiled pointedly and did not answer. Lawson looked away. To hell with them. Why should we worry about them? We've got to run the world for the sake of the little people. It's intelligence that's caused all the troubles of humanity. Man's mind is the root of all evil. This is the day of the heart. It's the weak, the meek, the sick, and the humble that must be the only objects of our concern. His lower lip was twisting in soft, lecherous motions. Those who are big are here to serve those who aren't. If they refuse to do their moral duty, we've got to force them. There once was an age of reason, but we've progressed beyond it. This is the age of love. Shut up, screamed James Taggart. They all stared at him. For Christ's sake, Jim, what's the matter? Said Orrin Boyle, shaking. Nothing, said Taggart, nothing. Wesley, keep him still, will you? Mouch said uncomfortably. But I failed to see. Just keep him still. You don't have to listen to him. We don't have to listen to him, do we? Why, no, but then let's go on. What is this? Demanded Lawson. I resent it. I most emphatically. But he saw no support in the faces around him, and he stopped his mouth, sagging into an expression of pouting hatred. Let's go on, said Taggart feverishly. What's the matter with you? Asked Orrin Boyle, trying not to know what was the matter with himself and why he felt frightened. Genius is a superstition, Jim, said Dr. Ferris slowly, with an odd kind of emphasis, as if knowing that he was naming the unnamed in all their minds. There's no such thing as the intellect. A man's brain is a social product, a sum of influences that he's picked up from those around him. Nobody invents anything, he merely reflects what's floating in the social atmosphere. A genius is an intellectual scavenger and a greedy hoarder of the ideas which rightfully belong to society, from which he stole them. All thought is theft. If we do away with private fortunes, we'll have a fairer distribution of wealth. If we do away with the genius, we'll have a fairer distribution of ideas. Are we here to talk business, or are we here to kid one another? Said Fred Kinnan. They turned to him. He was a muscular man with large features, but his face had the astonishing property of finely drawn lines that raised a corner of his mouth into this permanent hint of a wise, sardonic grin. He sat on the arm of the chair, hands in pockets, looking at Mouch with the smiling glance of a hardened policeman at a shoplifter. All I have got to say is that you'd better staff that unification board with my men, he said. Better make sure of it, brother, or I'll blast your .1 to hell. I intend, of course, to have a representative of labor on that board, said Mouch dryly, as well as a representative of industry and of the professions of every cross-section of... No cross-section, said Fred Kinnan evenly. Just representatives of labor, period. What the hell, yelled Ornboyle. That's stacking the cards, isn't it? Sure, said Fred Kinnan. But that will give you a stranglehold on every business in the country. What do you think I'm after? Asked Kinnan. That's unfair, yelled Boyle. I won't stand for it. You have no right. You... Right? Said Kinnan innocently. Are we talking about rights? But I mean, after all, there are certain fundamental property rights which... Listen, pal, you want .3, don't you? Well, then you'd better keep your trap shut about property rights from now on. Keep it shut tight. This is where we are, my friends. This is where we're at. Ms. Rand was way ahead of her time for the United States because she had lived through this kind of demagoguery. She had lived through this kind of cultural revolution. We're here. And if you don't stand up and start to fight, you're going to lose it all. Our government's already gone this direction. Now the public is going that way too. We can take it back, but we have to be willing to fight. And that's going to be discomfort, trials, and tribulation. And until you're ready for that, you might as well just give up. Because this is where we are. Every single emergency order that's been issued by every single governor in the United States has been built on the last one and on the last one and on the last one and on the last one. Because now they can say, well, look, we've got this precedence. And their precedence is to go back and say, see, we declared this emergency a while ago, and now we have the precedence to build on that emergency. Watch the video that I did talking about rules for radicals in Marxism of the United States. You'll see it. They hit you from one side, and then they get you from the other. When you're prepared to fight over here, they'll hit you from over here. Ms. Rand knew what she was doing. She knew what she was talking about, and she was warning us, and we closed our eyes and we went ahead without the warning. And now anybody who speaks out is a conspiracy theorist, a conspiracy whack job. But this is where we're at. Just listen to the language. Resist tyranny. Fight oppression. Sic Semper Tyrannis. As always, thanks for watching the video. Thanks for being open-minded. Thanks for listening. I would ask that over here in the corner, somewhere on your screen, you hit the subscribe button. It's important, not for me, but because mainstream media, legacy media, isn't going to get the word out. They're not going to let people who don't toe the established line speak. So for the sake of liberty and for the sake of the defense of this nation, small little independent voices like mine need to be heard, especially the interviews. It's got very little to do with my commentary and a lot more to do with the interviews and the people who are affected when liberties are tread on. So once again, hit the subscribe button, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.